Children of the Revolucion is made possible by Coca-Cola and Coca-Cola bottlers throughout the U.S. and Latin America. Coca-Cola. Life begins here, destapando felicidad. Beginning 100 years ago, hundreds of thousands of families from Mexico came to the United States to escape the revolution that left their motherland in shambles. Some of Mexico's most talented families settled here and never went back. This exodus jump-started the Latinization of this country. Now, the children of the Revolucion tell the stories of their ancestors who risked it all to make this journey, helping to make America stronger, prouder, and better. About 600,000 families fled Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. And now there are 50 million Latinos in the whole United States. This influence of Latino-ness in this country is really changing America. It's changing America to where today almost everything that we do is touched by Latino hands.
So a few years ago, I read an essay about the Mexican Revolution and about how it drove a complete population of people from one country to another. That article made me start thinking about the stories that my husband has told me. Both of his grandmothers came to San Antonio during the Mexican Revolution to escape the chaos and the violence there. And both of them came alone, with no husband, with several small children in tow. And I, began to look at the revolution in a new way and think about how many people made that trip, how many women made that trip, what that journey must have been like for those people. And not only that, but all of these miraculous stories of the descendants of the people who came here and how they have changed the destiny of this part of America. And it occurred to me that those stories had not been told, but they hadn't been told out loud publicly. They hadn't been told in books. They haven't been told on television. And they haven't been told in the schools. And so, children don't really understand that part of their heritage and how there's so much to be proud of.
Well, the simple answer to why the Munguia family came to San Antonio is the revolution. My grandfather was involved in the revolution. In those days, when there was no radio, there was no television, the printer was the propagandist.
And so it was 3 brothers and myself that came with Daddy. And Daddy was naturally, he was a newspaper reporter and also a printer. So he worked both things in Mexico.
And he had selected sides, a progressive, almost socialist vision of Mexico. But the sides changed. And we had that period when Obregón and Madero and Zapata and Villa and all of them were in charge at one moment or another. And if you got caught on the wrong side of whoever was in the ascendancy, well, chances are you would be eliminated.
It's almost impossible to imagine the chaos that visited the people of Mexico during the first 10 years of the revolution. From 1910 until 1920, Mexico had 9 presidents. When the revolution started, Porfirio Díaz was still president. Then came Francisco León de la Barra, who served for 6 months as interim president. Next was the revolution's first hero, Francisco Madero, who served a short 15 months. After Madero's assassination, Pedro Lasurion became president, but just for one day. Then came the military dictator Victoriano Huerta, who was forced out after only 18 months. Francisco Carvajal was the next president. His term, 1 month. Of all the Mexican presidents during those 10 years, the longest serving was Venustiano Carranza, who served 6 years, both as provisional and elected president. After Carranza came another short-timer, Adolfo de la Huerta. He was president for 5 months. President number 9 in that decade was Álvaro Obregón, who served into the 1920s.
My grandmother, Leonor Aranda, her father had been a mercenary in the revolution. It was not necessarily about having a political position, it was about getting paid and having beans on the table. She comes right in the middle of it. She leaves. She brings her mother up here. Why? To be treated by Dr. Urrutia, because it had been said that he could help the mother who was paralyzed.
The legendary Dr. Urrutia was not your ordinary exile. He had been an extremely powerful figure in Mexico. Some say more powerful than the president himself. So it soon became apparent that he had to leave Mexico.
Dr. Urrutia was a surgeon. He was the private physician to Huerta, and Huerta was at the time the president of Mexico. And Huerta was very, well, I shouldn't say famous, but he was known for silencing opposition. And he did that in many different ways. And a very terrible legend, but it's told in Mexico all the time today, is that one of the ways that he silenced a member of the opposition was to have Dr. Urrutia cut the man's tongue out, which was pretty effective, apparently.
Was Urrutia a miracle worker or a war criminal? Depends on who you talk to. If you go across the sea to France, to the beaches of Normandy, you will find the American cemetery, and you will find a Latino name on every single row.
My dad and so many others, their dedication to service of this country is like serving their family, like looking after their mother in her old age. For them, it was their responsibility. They could no more not do that than they could stop breathing. That was just who they were. And they did it so quietly, no bragging.
And there was a brand new storefront, and across the top of it, it read, "The Chicano Times." I was stunned. I walked in, and there was Severo Perez, who ended up becoming one of the Chicano filmmakers in California. There was Max Martinez, significant writer in the Chicano movement. Ramon Vasquez and Sanchez, Chicano artists. They're sitting around. They'd just come out with the first edition of the Chicano Times magazine.
Particularly, the revolution became like refreshed through us. All the writers, all the intellectuals, the muralists, los tres grandes, Rivera, Sequeira, Orozco, were the inspiration for Chicano murals. A lot of Chicanos went to Mexico to study with Siqueiros particularly. They knew the history, they came back and they tried to copy that idea. Not copy the content, but just the idea of public murals, posters. The Taller de Gráfica Popular was very significant for poster makers in the United States. Literature, from Octavio Paz, El Laberinto de la Soledad, to Vasconcelos' La Raza Cósmica, all those texts that had been written after the Mexican Revolution became primary texts for my generation.
We think about the military and political, strategic, and economic dimensions of the revolution, but the cultural dimension of the Mexican Revolution was perhaps even more profound in its impact, because the Mexican Revolution produced this extraordinary explosion of new cultural insights from the work of painters and poets, philosophers, and particularly the work of José Vasconcelos, the man who becomes one of the first ministers of education in the first revolutionary governments. And Vasconcelos publishes a book called La Raza Cósmica in 1925. And in that book, Vasconcelos begins to look at the mestizo as preeminently Mexican, that the Mexican, as he and she had emerged out of history, had become the raza cósmica, the cosmic race, a new race that blended all races together.
When I was writing The House on Mongo Street, one has to remember that the writer was in her 20s, 21 to 28, which is a crucial decade for a woman's life, and especially a Mexican-American woman's life, because I was looking for my feminism, my own camino, and trying to live my life as a woman of letters. And I was also trying to pay for my apartment and live on my own, which is pretty blasphemous if you're a single Mexican-American woman. And I was also teaching in a very poor Mexican neighborhood in Chicago, the Pilsen community. If you don't write your story down, it didn't happen. It's not history. If you don't write it and document it, it's like that person never existed. And I always feel that love compels me to spend all those hours and years writing precisely so that I can write my version of history. Otherwise, it gets written for you.
I'm convinced that one of the most important dynamics that will be the impetus, the engine of the American future, is the presence of Latinos in the United States. As the traditional American population ages, it is the Latino population that is going to bring the youthful energy, the workforce, the creative energies that fuel the future of this country. I mean, it's just a simple matter of mathematics. We are now over 50 million people now, growing to well in excess of 100 million people over the next 4 decades or so. So a huge part of the growth of the United States, which means that everything that relies on growth, markets, consumer products, the growing middle class, schools, entertainment, everything that relies on growth must necessarily involve the Latino. America has some basic decisions to make, I think. We know this population is going to be large, but is it going to be large, underemployed, marginalized, undercompensated, and eventually alienated? Or is it going to be large, talented, creative, an energetic basis for the country's industries and leadership? I believe it's the latter, but I believe we have to work very hard to make it so.
And just who are the children of the Revolucion? Well, it could be you. Perhaps your grandparents or great-grandparents came to the U.S. to escape the Mexican Revolution. If they did, you are part of this rich history. If they did, your story needs to be told. Children of the Revolucion is made possible by Coca-Cola and Coca-Cola bottlers throughout the U.S. and Latin America. Coca-Cola, life begins here, destapando felicidad.